Today I'm walking you through exactly how I landed on the text, tone, and overall aesthetic for my podcast. I'll show you the step-by-step process from the questions I ask my guests before recording, to how I use Fiverr, the sponsor of today's video, to take my thumbnail from basic to click-worthy. But before I dive into how, let me first discuss why having a click-worthy thumbnail for your podcast even matters. Because if you're going to pour in all the time and energy into creating a great podcast, it only makes sense to create a thumbnail that actually gets people to click on it. A click-worthy thumbnail is often the first impression your show makes. And in a sea of endless scrolling, the first impression counts. Here's why it's so important. People scroll fast. A bold, eye-catching thumbnail can stop them mid-scroll and get them to actually look at your podcast. A thumbnail can also set the tone for your show. So perhaps your podcast is professional, funny, educational, emotional. Your podcast thumbnail helps set the tone of what an audience member can expect. A polished thumbnail also signals quality. If you've put thought into your design, it can often result in people assuming that you've put a lot of thought into your content too. A constant, memorable thumbnail style helps listeners quickly spot your episodes week after week, which could build brand loyalty and repeat listeners. Ultimately, a more eye-catching thumbnail often equals a thumbnail that's more likely to get clicked on. And more clicks could result in more listens, more followers, and more chances to grow your audience. Now that we're clear on why a click-worthy thumbnail matters, let me walk you through how exactly I go about creating mine. Step 1. Find a benchmark. Whether it's an existing podcast thumbnail you admire or a Pinterest mood board with font and color inspiration, having a clear visual direction makes everything easier. It gives both you and your designer, should you choose to use one, something to aim for. Step 2. Gather your assets. If you plan to use images in your thumbnail, make sure you have high-res photos of yourself and your guest. Before I host a guest on my podcast, I always ask them to send through a couple of high-res images that I tell them I will be using in my thumbnail. This way, I have all of my assets before we even have an interview, and this makes the whole process a lot quicker from having the interview to scheduling the show or posting the show. If you wait till after a show to ask your guest for assets, this could become somewhat of a bottleneck to you actually posting the show when you originally hoped to post it. Step 3, the actual design. Now, technically, you can design your own thumbnail. When I first started, I used Canva. It's beginner-friendly and it can totally get the job done. But I also know my strengths, and graphic design is not one of them. You see, this is why I turned to Fiverr. I've used Fiverr both personally and professionally over the years, and when it came to my podcast thumbnails, it was the first place I looked. I searched for podcast thumbnail designers, I browsed through examples of their work, and I found someone whose style aligned with the look I had in mind. Now, because I have multiple podcast episodes out already whose thumbnails I want to redo, I'm not going about starting with developing the style guide for my thumbnails. I'm actually looking for somebody to help me with a massive project here. So before I decided to commit to doing a big project with my thumbnail designer, I thought it might be a good idea to start small. So that's exactly what I did. I briefed them on one thumbnail to see if we would be a good fit. Now, luckily for me, my thumbnail designer, he was a dream. We had multiple revisions because my vision kept changing, which could be irritating for a thumbnail designer, but somehow he understood where I was trying to go. And he was happy to brainstorm with me to get to the thumbnail that I want, because this one thumbnail was going to set the standard of how I wanted the rest of my thumbnails to look. So to illustrate what I mean, when I got the first thumbnail design back, I felt it was too similar to what I already had. I then thought it might be a nice idea to add some elements just to help a prospective viewer get an idea of what my podcast is actually about. So I thought adding a mic just to show that it's a podcast, and maybe adding a laptop to give an idea that this is somewhat of a writing podcast might be a good idea. And when he sent back the thumbnail designs, I was really impressed, but it actually sparked another idea. I thought that I might actually keep my design very simple for all of my thumbnails, but have a slight tweak to each of the thumbnails that would be appropriate for the guest that I'm interviewing. So my show is all about writing your first book, and I interview agents, I interview authors, I interview marketing specialists in the book world. And so because the podcast episode was about an author, taking her cover and putting it in the thumbnail felt like a good idea. And it also sparked a lot of ideas for how I would use that space so that it relates to the guest going forward. Once we nailed the look, I went ahead and purchased the bulk package. I'm now going to give you 3 reasons why working with a professional was way better than me trying to go about this process myself. With this example, I had access to frames, but the frame that the professional had suited the book cover way better than any frame that I had access to. Also, the lighting between me and the person I was interviewing was different, so having a professional just make some little touches with regards to the lighting and the coloring helped create some unity with regards to how we came across on the thumbnail. With this example, I sent the before image to the editor, and one of the first things that the editor said to me is that there was too much text on the thumbnail. Now, this was something that I clearly didn't think about. I was really excited about the text that I had there, but upon having a quick glance at the thumbnail, I realized that nobody would be able to read all of that text in one quick glance. So I went about giving options, and then my thumbnail designer created 2 thumbnails with different texts. And then I got my audience on Instagram to vote which one I should go for. Now, for this example, I had originally written book 1 and book 2 on Post-its because when I tried to create book mock-ups, it just didn't really look nice. But again, I'm working with a professional here, so one of the first questions he asked me is, why is book 1 and book 2 written on Post-its? And then I explained my predicament to my thumbnail designer, but I said that I am not an expert when it comes to graphic design. So he's more than welcome to try put book 1 and book 2 on books. And he kindly offered to make both versions, which makes this process so much more enjoyable for me. So these were the final designs that he sent through. And where I was originally pretty set on the Post-its, I'm so glad I took his lead because the book option looked great. It blended in far better than what I was able to do using the frames I had available to me for free. So investing in a professional here just paid off once again. My older episodes are slowly being updated so that I have a cohesive look throughout my entire show. And this is honestly something far better than I could have ever created on my own. Now, I have linked the designer that I used in my description if you want to check him out. Or if you are curious about finding another designer on Fiverr, Fiverr has so kindly offered to give my audience a 10% discount if you use the code DREAMITDOIT at checkout. And this will give you a 10% discount on your first order. So I hope that helps. Tell us about your podcast in the comments. And here's to designing a thumbnail that stops the scroll and gets the click.